Hello and welcome to this edition of FiTV. I'm your host, Brad Swanson. We are coming to you just a block from Florida's capital. We're in the midst of the 2021 Florida legislative session, and I am joined by a friend of FiTV's, Representative David Silvers from South Florida. Representative, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much, Brad, for having me.
All right, so we're now in week 3 of this session, and you have for a long time, been an advocate of mental health issues. What are you working on this year?
This year, I'm actually working on 2 mental health pieces of legislation. One is focusing on mental health parity, which basically codifies the state statutes to the federal statutes, a federal level of parity coverage for mental health and substance use abuse. And I'm also working on a piece of legislation for our school system when it comes to student mental health, making sure that the mobile response teams have the proper protocols to de-escalate situations with children, so there's less likelihood for a child to go through an experience of a Baker Act.
All right, so when we're looking at that sort of thing with the Baker Act, walk us through what that's going to solve. Like, are we keeping kids out of the system? Are we keeping them out of being Baker Acted? What does it do?
It doesn't keep them out of the system. It gets those services to the children that truly need it, and maybe weeds out the children that don't need to go through a traumatic Baker Act. Mm-hmm. Maybe they need to have some other type of unfortunately, there's some situations where a Baker Act is being used again with a child, then maybe they shouldn't be having a Baker Act medical evaluation used at that time. So the goal is to make sure that if there's a medical event or a mental health or behavioral health event at a school, we need to de-escalate that situation first. Okay? If that child truly does need a Baker Act medical evaluation, we get them the help they truly need. But if they don't need that and they don't need to go through a traumatic experience, let's make sure that we don't put that child through that.
You've done so much for the Florida education school system. Where are you at when you think about the Board of Governors? We know you've been working with them. Talk to us about what you're doing in that space.
So 2 years ago, I ran the Board of Governors priority legislation. I believe it was House Bill 943, I believe. We'd have to go over those numbers. But it actually was a priority legislation that was very near and dear to my heart. 2017, there was a student on campus at FSU that died because no one would call for help. And this individual had drank in excess. And all the students that were around the student were afraid. They were afraid of getting in trouble at school. They were afraid of getting in trouble with the authorities. Now, in 2012, the legislature passed a Good Samaritan legislation that if you called for help for someone experiencing a drug overdose, that you wouldn't get in trouble, you couldn't be arrested for possession of those drugs. But it didn't speak to alcohol. And my legislation did in 2019, in conjunction with the Board of Governors, it spoke to alcohol. So if someone is drinking on campus in excess, they can call for help. Even if they're under 21 years old, they can call for help and make sure that student is going to be okay and get the medical care that student needs. So that was passed in 2019, and I couldn't have done it without their help. They were fantastic. The Board of Governors and Marshall Kreiser was great and really helping in getting it past both chambers with me. But they came to me this year and asked me to run another piece of legislation that is interesting. It speaks to assessment instruments. So there's a small loophole that students or anybody can take advantage of to actually put in a public records request for an exam. You don't really want that. That could lead to plagiarism and could lead to cheating. So they asked me to run this piece of legislation to make sure that we close that loophole and to make sure the assessments are properly given and make sure that the information doesn't come out before those tests are given.
What an amazing piece of legislation. I go back to my college years. If you or I had even thought you could have FOIA'd the upcoming test, right. I'm not saying I would have been above it, but that's a great loophole to ensure educational integrity for our students, both in our university system and across Florida. Well, Representative Silvers, thank you so much for coming on, and we're going to stay close to you in these pieces of legislation, and we look forward to having you back on FiTV again soon.
Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you. That's all the time we have for this episode of FiTV. Make sure you hit us up for more great interviews like this one on our social media platforms, and for now, thanks for tuning in.